place for us to be in at the beginning of this kind of journey that we're all taking in starting to learn how to build in VR. So just want to keep this in mind about sort of that goal of making VR a safe space for everybody. So how many people here have used any like VR or AR interfaces like Oculus or Meta? Yeah, okay, cool. So for most of us, like this is the image that we have when we think about VR kind of, right? It's like a dude like gaming or whatever, or doing maybe like some media stuff. But there's actually a lot of social good applications for VR. This one is called the Diversity Mirror, and it was made by the Stanford Virtual Human Interaction Lab. And what it does is it's a tool to help able-bodied, cis-het white men learn to have empathy. So you can just think about that. It's a tall order. But basically how it works, and let's see if I can get this to play. Oh, no. Basically how it works, I'm gonna need video help, please, Lori, is that the sort of subject, who's a white man, is doing some synchronous movement here and identifying with the image in the mirror right now. And then he kind of goes down, and when he comes back up, he's gonna see the image of a black woman reflected back at him. And so he kind of goes through this same process of doing these like synchronous movements and becoming identified with the image in the mirror. And after that moment, he actually goes through a series of things from the lens of the woman of color. So he deals with some street harassment, and he deals with a hostile work environment, and he deals with himself looking back at her as her boss, right? So there's a lot of sort of work being done. It's still in early phases to help people think about empathy, and so far the results are pretty promising. So that's something that we're kind of interested and excited about. And then there's this. This is Dead or Alive Extreme 3. I don't know if any of you have played Dead or Alive, but it kind of has the same premise as most of the games, which is like centered around like ogling like women playing beach volleyball in their bathing suits. But in the virtual version, you can actually like reach out and touch the main characters, and you can kind of like continue to grope them even as they ask you to stop. So as you can see, like in this like sketchy image of this guy motorboating, right? It's like, it's pretty frightening, the implications of what can happen, and VR, it has the capacity to help us empathize, but it also has the capacity to violate. So speaking of violation, a lot of us probably in this room understand this image in terms of how we use our devices, and we use our headphones often to sort of like keep out negative influence, right? So like deal with noise and with people. And for many of us, our headphones become this way that we kind of create a psychological or a physical barrier between us and invasions like catcalling, or like homophobic shadiness, or gender-based, violence or microaggressions. So the thing that's interesting that I kind of want Kent to talk about a little is just how this whole idea, the conversation around environment and personal space is completely different in VR. And that's really what we kind of started thinking about as our team. This is our team at ThoughtWorks. These are sort of some of the questions that we were kind of starting to figure out when we started putting this together. So,
thanks. So we started exploring virtual reality, and so one of the first experiments that we did was centered around an alternative to video conferencing, that is like connecting people at distance using avatars. And so you can see here that we kind of created this shared space where two people can interact, they can talk, they can draw in midair, and they can basically communicate as an alternative to something like Skype or Google Hangouts, right? Pretty cool, right? So what we noticed right away is that people got really, really into it. As soon as you can like share space with somebody, you start using the space, you're dancing, you're having a great time. This is so much better than a conference call, right? It's awesome. So we started focusing on, micro interactions, high fives. We put them in a beautiful environment. We made the birds fly overhead. It was so gorgeous. And so my role in the project was really as design lead to think about what's a comfortable space, right? What's a safe space? What constitutes comfort? And what ended up happening was I learned a lot about my own privilege in a way, because I focused, and our team focused pretty much exclusively on the environment. But what we found out was something much more profound. And I'll tell you a story. We did a demo of this at a Fortune 500 company. And a man said, it's great, but I look like Blue SpongeBob. I just can't really get into it. I'm looking at this other person, and it doesn't feel real to me. And a woman responded, you know what? Actually, I like the fact that I'm represented by this blue rectangle, because now I don't need to show my face. I can interact with people and not have that kind of additional anxiety around my identity and what I look like, and worry about constantly being judged. And I was like, wow, have I been approaching this from like a place of privilege. I didn't think about this at all. I was just like, oh yeah, you're in the mountains, you're happy, you're comfortable, right? That's comfort. And I realized that comfort is so much deeper than that. So I'd like to ask all of us here, how can we design our VR avatars as tools of empowerment? Another really interesting anecdote that happened was that there was a bug where one player would enter the space much taller than the other. And so we knew this was happening. We tested it amongst ourselves, and we thought, no big deal, whatever. Like, we'll just, we have tons of other things to do. We won't worry about it. Then we started testing it with people, and we found that, in fact, people got so uncomfortable by that they couldn't handle it. We had people like literally ripping the headset off. Like, I can't take it. This person is like overbearing. And so that was another like really profound lesson on how people feel safe, and how this virtual environment can really impact your sense of self and identity, and how you respond and interact with people. So as designers, how do we prioritize the emotional impact of a bug, right? We have to totally rethink what constitutes a defect, what constitutes something that would make someone else feel uncomfortable. This is totally different from traditional software design.
So the last thing we're going to talk about in terms of questions is just one that's really important to me right now, which is how do we create intimate spaces that don't become like too personal, right? So like for me, speaking from experience, I'm an abuse survivor, so my personal space is really important to me. And in real life, I can use my sort of physicality, I can use my body language, I can actually like put my hands up if I want to sort of protect my personal space. But in VR, you don't have that. You have your voice, but otherwise you can feel kind of powerless. So I think one of the questions that we're sort of grappling with right now as we think about future versions is like, how do we write acceptance criteria for personal space? So these are the kind of things that we're thinking about. And obviously we're not the first group to be thinking about like, what does it mean to have a world that's like unencumbered by identity-based oppression, right? There's like musicians like Sun Ra and author Octavia Butler, like they use this lens of science fiction to imagine what these worlds could be. And I think we're in a position where we have the power to make those worlds, like if we choose to do it, if we make that conscious decision to do it, and just, so I think the internet is kind of a cautionary tale of something that was supposed to be egalitarian, it was supposed to be a utopia, and we all know it's not a safe space, right? So again, like we have, the power to make it a safe space for all of us if we choose to do it that way, and it's up to us to do it. So thanks, that's all.